will you go to bring it back?
I find it extremely fitting that this is what opens the Modern Warfare 3 campaign, given everything that happened. Following the launch of Modern Warfare 2 in 2009, everyone in Infinity Ward should have probably been celebrating their record-breaking game. It was only the biggest entertainment product launch ever at the time, and a generation of players have since grown up in the chaotically fun multiplayer lobbies. By mid-January of 2010, it had made over $1 billion in sales, which pretty much guaranteed a Modern Warfare 3 and continued employment for the devs at Infinity Ward. However, that wouldn't end up being the case. There's an article on GameIndustry.biz that sums up the aftermath pretty well, but here's a quick play-by-play. So Infinity Ward founders and studio heads Jason West and Vince Zampella negotiated a longer contract with Activision after CoD 4 came out that granted them some bonuses and control over Call of Duty as a brand. They signed the contract despite there being a clause that stated if they were ever fired, Activision would keep Call of Duty and their bonuses, leaving them with basically nothing. This proved to be a mistake. Well, after Modern Warfare 2 came out, Activision found their reason to fire both of them and keep CoD all to themselves. They promptly sued Activision, followed by a countersuit claiming that EA had been trying to poach them, and that pretty much drove them to found Respawn Entertainment. You know, that one studio that makes Apex Legends. Oh, and Titanfall 2, I guess. With their core leadership gone, several key members of Infinity Ward staff jumped ship and joined their old bosses at Respawn to begin working on Titanfall 1. With lots of key staff gone, freshly formed Sledgehammer Games and Raven Software worked on developing multiplayer while what was left of Infinity Ward worked on the campaign. Given everything that happened, Modern Warfare 3 should probably be a hot mess of a game. While it's not as focused as its predecessor in terms of themes, Modern Warfare 3 is still a satisfying, if safe, end to a trilogy of games that help define the genre. Usually the worst people have to say about the game as a whole is that it's basically just more Modern Warfare 2. After a mass exodus of staff and creative talent, that's probably a massive compliment to the final product we received. I don't know whether it's ever been definitively stated anywhere how much of the game had been planned out in advance, but considering how natural the story beats feel following the end of Modern Warfare 2, I'm going to go with the assumption that the general story was already laid out before the studio was turned upside down. And even if it wasn't, you can feel that Infinity Ward poured everything they had into finishing the game. If the game's tone is any indication of what it was like working there in circa 2010, then the theme they did choose for the game was apt.
That all it takes is the will of a single man.
Despite everything being against them, the remaining staff at Infinity Ward gave it their all and delivered a game that probably shouldn't have even been a quarter as good as it ended up being. Infinity Ward's world as they knew it was gone. So how far would they go to bring it back? Or at the very least try their hardest to finish what the whole team had started. While many quickly dismiss this entry, I'm going to give it the attention it deserves for those that stayed behind to deliver a game through sheer force of will. To maybe save everyone just a little bit of time, I'm going to quickly summarize my overall thoughts on this game.
This is brilliant, but I like this.
While Modern Warfare 2's overall story and gameplay is better than MW3's, that doesn't mean that the campaign is a disappointment. In many ways, it naturally continues and concludes where the previous entry left off 2 years prior. But while we had to wait for 2 years, the story picks up immediately after Nikolai rescues Price and a wounded Soap from Afghanistan. He takes them to a secret PMC base in India to treat Soap's wounds, and while he heals, we get thrown into the middle of World War III. Get it? Because WW3 becomes MW3. The invading Russian force has been driven back by the American army. After reclaiming DC, the Army Rangers and Marines have pinned the invaders to Manhattan and New York, which they've turned into a stronghold and staging ground. A jamming device blocks American communications and guided weapon systems inside the city, which means if it's to be retaken, that jammer needs to go. With the mission set, a special detachment of Delta Force is chosen to disable the jammer. Thus begins our first major difference in this game compared to the previous two, and that's the lack of perspective from the ordinary soldier. Despite always featuring special forces of some type, most of the previous Call of Duty games feature perspectives from the common soldier. Call of Duty 4 had Private Jackson and the Marines, and Modern Warfare 2 had Ramirez and the Army Rangers. These missions both served a distinct thematic and gameplay difference compared to the smaller commando missions that the SAS or Task Force 141 units went on. The Marines and Rangers allowed for more open levels and more player agency to tackle situations in slightly different ways. While objectives were present, the more open level design meant that the situation could be tackled slightly differently upon each subsequent replay. While the Delta Force serves a slightly similar function in that they often accompany the larger ground forces, their objectives differ from those of the regular armed forces, and really keep you in the mind space of a Tier 1 operator. And on top of that, Team Metal doesn't provide for as memorable characters as the Army Rangers do before them. While I prefer them to the Marines from CoD 4, they at least feel like they leave more of an impact thanks to their deaths during the nuclear detonation in Urzikstan. While Team Metal character-wise is honestly probably on par with their previous counterparts, there was just something about the charismatic voice acting and the desperate feel of the situations they were in that helped Sergeant Foley and Corporal Dunn feel more like interesting characters. During their missions, they're the underdogs, as they're constantly outgunned during the early hours of the Russian invasion of the US. Delta Force, on the other hand, is always on the offensive and better trained fighters than the random grunts they go up against. With the Rangers, there was a fear that any of them could go at any time. Delta, though, feels as tough as their name suggests, Team Metal. So while the Rangers make for easy underdogs, the most notable thing about Delta is that each member is voiced by a well-known actor. Sandman is voiced by William Fichtner, Grinch is voiced by Timothy Olyphant, and Truck is voiced by Idris Elba. And the big names don't even stop there, as their Overlord commander on comms is voiced by Bruce Greenwood. It feels a little odd that these big names are attached to these pretty basic characters, but Call of Duty has always been wonky with how they use their celebrity talent. But that's a tirade for another day, though. However, while I've been critiquing their use so far, that doesn't mean that these sections of the game are bad. It's just not as good as how previous titles have handled similar levels. Given that we're in New York, though, maybe that's fitting. With such a large city to render, having more linear levels that funnel a player from point A to point B was probably easier on memory space to store and render. While I applaud the more open nature of some of the levels in CoD 4 and Modern Warfare 2, the setting of those levels are more simpler. War Pigs is a single street with buildings that don't go past the second or third story, while Wolverines is one of those parking lots with a bunch of restaurants within walking distance of each other. While probably possible today, I don't think rendering entire open-range city blocks of New York City was really feasible back on the PS3 and 360, at least not with this type of game. Also, given that this is our first level of the game, it helps get players up to speed on how combat works for those that might be new. The fact that it doesn't hold your hand like previous titles, I think, speaks to the fact that this being the third Modern Warfare game means Infinity Ward knows most people will probably have played a prior entry at some point, and that the pacing of this game is basically non-stop. When it says go, we go. And so Team Metal fights their way to the New York Stock Exchange, finding the jammer tower on the roof. After it's destroyed, Team Metal heads to the harbor to link up with the SEALs. Their mission is to take out the Russian submarine commanding the attack on New York and turning its weapons against the Russian fleet. It's a fun mission that feels like a natural continuation of where things left off in game design in Modern Warfare 2. MW2 featured an opening cutscene with an underwater infiltration. Now you as the player get to control an underwater infiltration. And also feeling like a natural extension of the previous games, Modern Warfare 3 continues the trend of featuring some sort of gimmick in most of its levels to break out the usual run and gun shooting. The last mission ended with a helicopter turret segment. Here, Sandman and Frost flee to their extraction point on recycled gameplay from the end of Modern Warfare 2. While it's a pretty obvious cut and paste when playing these games back to back to back, the successful victory against the Russians more than makes up for that, as you realize that invasion that started in the last game has officially been thwarted, capping off one of Modern Warfare 2's hanging plot threads. And speaking of hanging plot threads, we now jump back to what's left of Task Force 141 at Nikolai's safe house. Just as Soap is receiving medical treatment, Makarov makes his next move and sends forces that are loyal to him to attack the safe house. Since Soap is incapacitated, players now take control of Yuri, an ex-Spetsnaz operator and one of Nikolai's most trusted allies. As the safe house falls, Price and Yuri fight their way through the streets of India to get Soap to safety. After their ace-in-the-hole unmanned drone is taken out by a predator, Yuri runs for safety and manages to barely survive a fall down a mountain. And with our opening levels done, we can take a slight moment to take a breath as Price catches us up on the fallout from Modern Warfare 2.
They say truth is the first casualty of war. But who defines what's true?
The Russian president is flying to Hamburg to negotiate a peace treaty with NATO delegates.
Truth is just a matter of perspective.
However, many Russians still blame America for the massacre at Zakhaev Airport.
The duty of every soldier is to protect the innocent, and sometimes that means preserving the lie of good and evil. That war isn't just natural selection played out on a grand scale.
But for now, it looks like the world may finally know peace.
The only truth I've found is that the world we live in is a giant tinderbox. All it takes is someone to light the match.
While I said Modern Warfare 3 isn't as focused on its own themes, it carries over the use of disinformation and truth being a matter of perspective from Modern Warfare 2 well enough. This also helps ground the game in a little bit more reality and makes the player think about the forces at play again.
Loyalists, eh? Are those the good Russians or the bad Russians?
The fact that Russia as a whole wasn't really the villain in the previous game often gets buried as players fight to reclaim DC. Thanks to both Shepard and Makarov's scheming, the invading Russian forces in both Modern Warfare 2 and 3 are just as much initial victims as everyone else, as they're fighting for a lie the world fell for. There are moments where it seems like Infinity Ward tries to make them a little more devious, as dead American civilians can be found in certain areas during the MW2 Ranger missions, and while I wish I could say that was wrong for them to do, seems like it's unfortunately pretty spot on given current events. So while the morality of the foot soldiers is left in question at times, we need to talk about their leadership, which is fitting given that that's the next mission. Players now jump to Agent Kharkov with the Russian president's secret service. Through his eyes, we meet President Vorchevsky, who in all cases seems to be a good man. He was slightly mentioned in Modern Warfare 2 via newspaper clippings in Makarov's safe house, but now we really get to have a read on the man. He appears to be a family man that dotes on his daughter, which will be important later on. What's more important now is that he appears to have never wanted to go to war with the US following the Zakhaev airport massacre, but was pressured into it by his cabinet. Now that the Russian invasion has been defeated, a peace delegation is set to take place in Hamburg to officially end the war. Not everyone is on board with this option, as it becomes clear Makarov's influence, or at least people that share similar thoughts to him, are still in positions of power. The following conversation is well written. I wish there was more of it sprinkled throughout the game, as what we get here is just basic stuff to establish character.
Gentlemen, we have only two choices. Peace or war. Life or death. For the sake of our children, we must seek peace with the West.
President, now is not the time to appease our enemies.
We destroy our enemies when we make friends with them. If we cannot end our differences, at least...
That's gunfire!
But of course, listening to diplomatic speak for 20 minutes wouldn't be interesting, so Makarov plays his next hand and his agents try to hijack the president's plane. Unfortunately, Vorchevsky is not Harrison Ford and must rely on his security team to escort him to a safe room in the plane. After a short zero-G fight as the plane loses altitude, it makes an emergency crash landing. The Russian Secret Service manages to save Vorchevsky from Makarov's goons, but not from Makarov himself, who personally shows up to kidnap the president. His mission, as we can probably guess, is to conquer, at the very least, all of Europe. And given that he's loony, Makarov doesn't really care if the continent gets wiped off the map by nuclear weapons, as long as he gets to plant his flag in what's left. So with the Russian president in his pocket, Makarov is now in direct control of the Russian armed forces. What exactly he plans to do with them will have to wait as we jump back to the 141. Thanks to intel from Nikolai and Yuri, they've tracked part of Makarov's schemes to a shipping company that is sending shipments of something across Europe. So the new team heads to Africa to find out what he's up to and put a stop to him. At this point, 3 games deep, you probably know the drill. The crew sneak in all stealthy-like until they're discovered and forced to go loud. They fight their way through the bad guys, but since we're only in the first act, Makarov gets away, if he was ever there to begin with. With the cargo now on the move, it heads to the UK, where MI5 calls in the SAS to deal with the situation. This is probably a good time to bring up that this game has several callbacks to Call of Duty 4, not just in terms of story, but also in gameplay. At the close of this trilogy, I guess Infinity Ward wanted to revisit some of the things they'd done prior and revamp them a little. For instance, Turbulence really does feel like Mile High Club kicked up to 11, the New York Stock Exchange feels similar to the TV station in Charlie Don't Surf, and there's a truck section coming up that feels similar to Game Over. 3 of the characters in this level are even returning characters, as the SAS squads are led by Sergeant Wallcroft and Corporal Griffin, who are part of the squad that participated in the cargo ship raid at the beginning of CoD 4. And their commander is an older Captain McMillan from All the Gillied Up. And with even more returning cast members, Sergeant Wallcroft is voiced by Craig Fairbass, meaning he's returned a 3rd time to voice a completely different character compared to the last. As you can probably expect, the mission goes sideways very quickly, devolving from a commando raid into a high-speed shootout involving a subway train. The SAS managed to regroup though and stop one of the trucks with unknown cargo by the Parliament buildings in London. And here's where we reach the controversy for this game. As in, this mission didn't cause a controversy at all. After the ruckus that no Russian caused in 2009, Infinity Ward probably didn't want to cause another stir amongst political pundits, but still felt like they needed a shocking moment to round out the trilogy. CoD 4 had the nuke, Modern Warfare 2 had no Russians, so what did they give Modern Warfare 3? A completely skippable vignette of a family getting blown up that doesn't play into the story of the game at all and exists solely for shock value. It's so unnecessary that if the player does choose to skip it, there's an alternate ending to the mission in which the truck blows up in front of the SAS, and honestly feels like a more natural ending compared to Davis' family vacation. And like I said, it was so underwhelming that no one threw a fit over it and hardly anyone even remembers it. So yeah, it's dumb, and that's really all I'm going to say on it since I talked about it more at length in my Modern Warfare 2 campaign remaster review in 2020. It's a footnote in the game, so it's a footnote here. So moving on, what was in those trucks were dirty bombs to detonate all over Europe. This comes on the heels of when the peace negotiations in Hamburg were supposed to be taking place, and the Vice President of the US is caught up in not just the gas attacks, but now a major mobilization of the Russian army across all of Europe. Again, pretty frightening to think of now. So with a major US political figure in jeopardy, Team Metal is sent in to rescue him, but they have to fight their way to him. In another visual callback to CoD 4, Delta gets boots on the ground and fights their way through the streets and even a parking garage to reach their objective. It's here I think I'll speak on the fact that as of this recording, Modern Warfare 3 doesn't have a remaster for it. Rumors are again beginning to percolate that there's one finished and just waiting to be released, but that's the future and I'm stuck in the present. So for this video, I had to play and record my footage using the PC version. And for an 11-year-old game, graphically, it holds up pretty well, not to mention there's lots of extra animations thrown in this time around to keep the player immersed. For instance, when Frost gets himself out of the tank, he throws his rifle out and climbs out. In the original versions of CoD 4 or Modern Warfare 2, the player model would have probably just floated out. Lots of little moments like these and enhanced facial animations were added to the remasters for those games, and I'll be curious to see how a remastered Modern Warfare 3 turns out other than an obvious graphical upgrade, since this already feels pretty modern in terms of things like that. Also, I don't know about anyone else, but does anyone else get protected with the NPC tank guys when they join you on foot? The one that always checks to make sure Frost is okay, I feel like must be protected at all costs, and I get a little sad if he ends up dead. Anyway, with the Vice President rescued, the 141 is now on the hunt for where the gas came from, and if it holds any leads on Makarov. They track the shipments to a warlord named Warabe, which isn't on the nose at all, and raid his house. After he says that he only ever met the bomb maker, a man named Volk, Price executes Warabe, and they get ready to leave. What seems like a pretty cut and dry mission quickly goes south as the LZ suddenly becomes overrun. Even the game was surprised by this, as the heroic music and Price and Soap immediately talking strategy makes you think the mission is about to wrap.
So you think Warabe was telling the truth about Volk? He was telling the truth. I bet Makarov's life on it. We start making... Nikolai, get out of there! Take cover!
So there's more fighting to the backup LZ, but Nikolai gets shot down, which means that the entire group is forced to fight through a sandstorm to reach him. Something I love about the 141 missions this time is about how cut off they feel. You sometimes have some guys fighting with you in a helicopter as backup, but most of the time it's just Price, Soap, and Yuri against the world, helping to make the mission feel all that more desperate. Despite this, Price still has contacts on the inside who know his name is being dragged through the mud. One of those is Sandman, who was actually on the Operation Kingfish raid that landed Price in the Gulag. Passing the intel off, Sandman and Team Metal are tasked with hunting down Volk. The following mission is eerie, as the streets of Paris are more deserted than the catacombs you end up fighting through later. But eventually Volk is captured and it's time to bring him in. Thus begins another allusion to CoD 4 with the return of the AC-130 gunship mission, this time in color. The major difference in gameplay now compared to before is that the camera zone isn't tied to what weapon you've selected and can be adjusted manually. Other than that, the mission works about the same as it does in Death from Above, but this time they take it a step farther. Throughout sections of the mission, the perspective will switch from the gunship back to Frost on the ground. I love this switch up, as it gives you both perspectives and allows the mission to flow throughout basically the entire city. The mission ends as airstrikes bring down the Eiffel Tower to stop the advance of major Russian armor units towards Delta. While the cost was high, the intel recovered was worth it, and Delta learns that Makarov will be in Prague soon for a War Council meeting. While US Special Forces probably won't get there in time, Sandman gives Price the silent green light to go for it, as they're closer. So the 141 infiltrates the city amongst a flurry of war crimes and links up with the local resistance and a familiar face. As Price and Kamarov get in position, Soap and Yuri move to their designated sniping spot far behind enemy lines. And this is where the game gets clever and plays with expectations. Several of the prior missions have felt reminiscent of CoD 4, so following that example, if the previous mission was all gillied up, then this one should be one shot, one kill. It even opens in a similar manner with the passage of time and the cutscene of the snipers in their nest ready to take down their target. However, something goes wrong and Kamarov appears in an elevator wearing C4. Then, Makarov's voice comes over the radio.
Yuri, my friend, you never should have come here.
What the hell are you talking about? Get out now!
Despite feeling familiar, the outcome is not the same. As Yuri regains consciousness, it's clear that there's now something wrong with Soap. As Makarov's forces close in, the level becomes a relay race of covering and handing off the wounded Soap. The blood trail Soap is leaving behind isn't good though, and after telling Price that Makarov and Yuri are connected, he dies.
Oh no, 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 no! Soap! No, no, no! Soap! You have to go now! Get off me!
I'm sorry.
Without time to even take Soap's body, Price and Yuri are forced to flee the area, and the secrets are revealed. All of the intel and knowledge Yuri had on Makarov is because they used to be friends long ago. And as it turns out, they've been in the background all along. They were the reasons that Zakhaev survived the attempted assassination of Pripyat. Makarov was the one Zakhaev put in charge of making sure the nuke went off in Urzikstan.
Is everything ready?
Do it. Thousands of souls extinguished by the push of a button.
Everyone, hang on!
But while Makarov went mad with power, Yuri wouldn't have any of it, and leaked the airport massacre plan to US intelligence. Unfortunately for him, nothing went right. If we're going under the assumption that Shepard somehow managed to tip off Makarov to Alan's undercover op, he was probably able to deduce how it leaked in the first place. Makarov and the other terrorists leave Yuri for dead, but he tries in vain to stop them anyway before he's taken away to a hospital. Tying together the trilogy like this is awesome, and one of the reasons why Modern Warfare 3 is a fitting conclusion to this trilogy. With Soap gone and not completely trusting of Yuri, Price reluctantly takes him along as they infiltrate an old ultranationalist hideout. The following mission is fittingly set at night in the rain to reflect the dour mood. Price himself is also more openly hostile to Yuri. While he's always been tough, there's a warmness to the way he interacted with his squad mates in the past. With Soap gone though, Price is now all business. While he's always been one to get things done, there's an extra edge to him in this mission, as he's now more driven than ever before. Despite not finding Makarov at the castle, the pair go get intel on where President Vorchevsky's daughter is. Price calls it in, and Delta Force heads back to Germany. I've always found this mission weird, as it opens in media res for pretty much no reason. It feels like something that was done for an E3 showcase, but it looks like all the trade show presentations back in the day were from the New York levels. Not really a complaint or anything, but just an odd way to start a mission this late into the campaign is all. It starts out easy enough with providing Overwatch for Team Granite as they go after Elena, but after they're all KIA, Team Metal is forced to go after her themselves. It's then a fight up the streets towards the building, but because the Germans just can't win a world war, the tank column you're running with gets blown up and a building dropped on them. And then just at the last second, Elena is taken away by Makarov's men to a diamond mine in Siberia. From there, it's a joint operation between the 141 and Team Metal to rescue both Vorchevskys before the president can give up the launch codes. Any semblance of self is out the window here, as not only do Team Metal assist, but basically every other Delta Force operator as well. After Elena is rescued and Vorchevsky is taken into a reinforced room, Price has the team detonate explosives on the ceiling to blast their way in down below. But even though he's been secured, he's still not safe, as a horde of angry ultranationalists are now descending upon our heroes. Yuri is wounded and dragged to the escape chopper, and Price is forced to leave Team Metal behind before the mine collapses. But while the mission is exciting and satisfying to get Vorchevsky clear, I feel nothing for the loss of Team Metal. Thematically, there's a good reason to wipe them off the board, which I'll get to in a moment, but I wish more had been done with them to make them memorable the same way that the Rangers had been. If this had been Sergeant Foley and Corporal Dunn we were leaving behind, I would have been distraught. But losing Delta just kind of feels like a...
Oh no! Anyway, last week...
I even felt more for losing Kamarov than I did for Team Metal, as there's at least old history with him. And Soap obviously takes the cake for hard-to-swallow losses. I remember that just being a gut punch the first time I played through this back in the day. While he wasn't that much more developed than any other CoD character at the time, the 3-game history the player had with him, starting as a silent protagonist in CoD 4 to a recognizable icon, made the loss feel hard. So while I get why they needed to be removed, I almost wish that Team Metal didn't die just because they seemed like they left a meh impact on the story and weren't as effective in their roles as the Rangers were. Out of everything, I feel more for Price than anyone else, especially when I realize the dialogue in this mission is Price is forced to leave Sandman behind mirrors when Sandman was forced to leave Price behind during Operation Kingfish.
I don't care what your orders are! We stay, we're all dead. Lifting off.
It's too late! We go back, we all die! Come in! Sandman, do you copy? Sandman, are you still there?
But with Vorchevsky saved, he can finally end the hostilities and bring an end to a very short but thankfully not nuclear World War III. So as the war officially ends, we're reminded of how all of this started in the first place.
There's a simplicity to war. Attacking is the only secret. Dare, and the world yields.
A chapter in which we pursue peace.
How quickly they forget that all it takes to change the course of history is the will of a single man.
Months after the war is over, Makarov has finally been located, so the 141 does what it does best. Utilizing Juggernaut armor, Price and Yuri fight their way up to the top floor of the hotel he's riding at, but there can't be a Modern Warfare finale without a helicopter crash, so the armor is rendered useless. That doesn't stop them though, as the two continue fighting their way through Makarov's security to finally put him down. Even when the entire top floor is basically turned into a smoldering ruin, Price still manages to make it to Makarov's escape helicopter and crashes that one too. But just as he's about to be finished off, Yuri comes in for the save and sacrifices his life to empty Makarov's gun. This is what it all comes down to. This is why Team Metal, Yuri, and Soap had to be removed from the board. The only ones left are just Price and Makarov. Each man has changed the course of history by sheer force of will, so who will have the stronger one? Well, with only a moment to spare, Price beats Makarov to a pulp and ties a cord around his neck before smashing the skylight and letting Makarov be hung by the rafters. With Makarov dead, Price's mission is finished, and the credits roll as he takes a puff of his cigar. Thus ends the Modern Warfare trilogy. While the game has some problems like jumping through too many perspectives in the first act and not having as refined a theme as Modern Warfare 2 did, it's still a good ending to the trilogy. With the exception of some finer details of how exactly Shepard's plan in Modern Warfare 2 worked, all the loose ends are tied up. It's an incredibly bittersweet ending too, as while satisfying, the fact that we realize Price has lost so many of his comrades over the years has to take its toll. I think that the ending is perfect. There's no joyous celebration, there's no fireworks or saluting comrades to congratulate him on a job well done, it's just Price and the rebel finally able to take a breath. Fitting that the final mission is dust to dust, considering what it meant in those lost. Gaz, Griggs, Roach, Ghost, Sandman, and of course, Soap. Makarov hanging from the rafters wasn't for the world. This victory was for them. Despite the issues I brought forward, I still love this campaign. In many ways, I like it more than CoD 4's, as the now 2-game history makes the story progression all that more meaningful. While Modern Warfare was genre-defining and Modern Warfare 2 sought to be bigger, Modern Warfare 3 is a testament to a team who was torn apart, much like the 1 for 1, but came together in the end to finish their mission. I can remember thinking, what's next, as Price sat in the aftermath in that hotel. I imagine the feeling at Infinity Ward must have been similar, because they had an important decision to make on how they would carry forward. So the question is, would they yet again rise to the occasion, or crumble under the pressure?